give more returns. Get more security and more interest on your fixed deposits from Sri Lanka's largest finance company, LMDtv Finance.
To curb corruption, one must be courageous to confront and rise up against the corrupt. Sleep well, be guided by ethics and standards for peace of mind.
Refresh Sri Lanka for a civic-minded society. LMD, the voice of business.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. Tonight on the forum, we're talking about investments in SMEs. And with us, we have the head of IFC Sri Lanka and Maldives, Alejandro Alvarez de la Campa. It's very nice to have you on the show, Alejandro.
Thank you very much for having me today.
To start off our discussion, before we actually go into talking about SMEs and investing in SMEs, what would you say is your assessment of the investment climate overall for the South Asian region today?
So the South Asia region is a region which is quite diverse, as you know. So we have giants like India and countries with large populations like Bangladesh. And then we have very small economies like Maldives and Bhutan. And so it's kind of hard to make an assessment that would be fair to all countries. But I think we can find some commonalities in the investment climate in the region. So one important aspect is that this region is actually going to grow this year at the highest rate of all the emerging market economies or regions. So they're going to grow at around 5.8%, which is a good growth rate. But again, this growth rate will differ significantly from one country to another. So you have high growth countries between 6 and 7.2% of GDP, like India, Bangladesh, Maldives, and then you have countries that you see the economy contracting are negative growth, like Sri Lanka and Pakistan. So it's quite diverse. I think also in terms of the per capita income in these countries is around $2,000, which is still quite far from some of the neighboring countries in East Asia. And so if the aspiration of these countries is to move into the high-income countries, they really need to have that large growth, even more than at 6% on average. And in terms of FDI, we have seen also that the inflows of FDI are a bit below what we see in other regions. So around 1.5% of the GDP in terms of FDI inflows, which is below the 2% on average of other regions. Now, when in terms of investment climate commonalities that I see in a few of the countries, there are a few that we can name. The first one would be addressing the macro and fiscal vulnerabilities of some of these countries. A few of these countries have gone into crisis, as you know. And macro and fiscal vulnerabilities are an issue for a number of countries. We have a high debt to GDP ratio of around 86% on average, which is a bit higher than other regions. And so we're going to have to see how countries can balance the public expenditure with the tax revenue collection, which also tends to be low in the region. That's the number one. The second one, I think it's on trade liberalization. There is still room for improvement in this space because the region still has some of the highest tariffs, including non-tariff barriers when you compare to other emerging market economies. And also the cost of trade is still high compared to others. So I think in the trade liberalization space, you can see some potential improvements in the future. I also think that growth needs to come also with more private sector investment and private sector growth. We still see some levels of and playing level fields, if you wish, between domestic and foreign investors in some countries where investment laws and competition laws are still excluding some private sector from some companies, big weight of SOE in the economy. So I think that's another area or space where we can see improvements. And then the final one, which is common, I think, the energy transition, where these countries will need to transition into a greener economy that will lift productivity, cut pollution, reduce the reliance that they have on fuel imports. And some countries like India and Pakistan have already achieved quite a lot in terms of renewable energy sources. But I think the key will be on how the private sector and companies can adopt those green technologies into their economy.
Alejandro, thank you very much for giving us an overview of the region. And like you said, investment is fundamental for growth, and Sri Lanka, from what I gather, is not really showing a positive picture per se. But if we focus on the climate here in the country in terms of attracting investments, what's the picture looking like from where you're sitting?
Yes, so as you know, Sri Lanka has gone through the worst macroeconomic crisis in its history. So obviously, the investment landscape is perhaps one of the bleakest investments prospects that we've seen in the last few years. When you look at some of the numbers, the foreign direct investments also similarly to the region have dropped, but in this case much more dramatically, where in 2022 they had around $800 million in foreign direct investment, which when you compare it to the peak before the COVID pandemic, which was at 1.8 billion, is quite a significant drop. This tells us that investor confidence is not strong at the moment to invest in Sri Lanka. And even though we've had some positive signs of recovery since the crisis last year, and a lot of the macroeconomic indicators are looking much better, I think Sri Lanka, in order to bring back confidence to investors, they need to continue working on the reforms that have been agreed with the IMF and some of the structural reforms that the country is going through. And I would say that to bring back investors to the pre-COVID levels, they'll have to work at two levels. One is in the short term. Sri Lanka needs to complete the external debt restructuring, and I think there are very positive signs that will be done already with an agreement with the bilateral creditors, but there's still the commercial creditors that need to agree on the debt restructuring, but hopefully that will be done in the next few months. More in the medium term and long term, I think it's essential that Sri Lanka continues with the reform pace and working on some of the structural reforms that I think will help bring investors back. And I would mention a few of those. The first one is continue working on trade liberalization, reducing para-tariffs, but also creating a more competitive environment for foreign investors with the new investment law that Sri Lanka is working on. I think that could really open up new markets for investors here. At the same time, given the fiscal constraints that the government has, it's essential that Sri Lanka looks at potential public-private partnerships to develop a key infrastructure in the country. And that will need the support of the private sector. Third, the government has started with very promising reforms in the SOE sector with the creation of a holding company and restructuring of some of the SOEs. I think this reform will also be essential to bring in more private sector participation in the economy and investments. Another important area that I would mention is the transition to the green economy and the renewable energy sector. And it's also very encouraging to see the current reforms that the government is engaged in with the reform of the CEB, the Ceylon Electricity Board, and also the new Electricity Act, which we think will be very positive for investors to come and invest in the renewable energy space, both wind and solar. And finally, I think important reforms will be around the digital economy and climate change, because digital economy, I think digitizing government services, payments, and others would create a much more transparent economy, which will give investors additional confidence.
Thank you, Alejandro. Against that backdrop, like you said, so many things need to be done. And also we have the SME sector who we are focusing on today. Now, this sector was massively, significantly impacted by the crisis, by the pandemic and all of that. But like you said, since there are small signs of the macroeconomy, well, I would say improving, what's it looking like for SMEs in general? Are they coping better?
Thank you very much. This is a very important topic. And I think in order to understand the relevance of the SME sector, it's important to provide some numbers about the SME sector in Sri Lanka, which comprises about 75% of the total number of enterprises, SMEs. They also contribute to around 20% of exports in Sri Lanka, employ around 45% of the labor force, and contribute to just above 50% of the GDP. So as you can see, this is a very significant contribution to the Sri Lankan economy. And unfortunately, the successive crises that we have seen from COVID to the Easter bombings and then the macroeconomic crisis of last year, the SME sector is the one that has disproportionately been more impacted. And there are a number of reasons for that. The crisis created severe constraints and contractions in some industries where SMEs had quite a large presence, like construction, tourism, for example, and that impacted them severely, and around 500,000 jobs were lost right after the crisis and with the COVID crisis as well. So they've been affected quite severely. There are some reasons why they have been more disproportionately affected. One of them is that they haven't been able to access finance as easily as large corporates, among other things because interest rates in the last year or so have been quite high, and in some cases SMEs haven't been able to service their debts because of the high interest rates and lack of ability to access new financing. And so access to finance has been a big constraint. There's been a decline overall on consumer and service demand, which has also affected SMEs. I think SMEs, when you compare them to larger firms, they also have less access to technology and innovation than larger firms. And obviously, when you don't have access to technology and innovation, you tend to perform less, you tend to not perform as well as large corporates or companies that have access to that technology and innovation to reach more customers. And then finally, I think SMEs that have been able to access or been integrated into supply chains or value chains have performed much better than others. And so I think those are some of the factors that would have determined whether SMEs are coping better or worse, depending on whether they have access to some of those elements that I've described.
It's time to take a short break now, but we'll soon return to talk more about SMEs.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging media.
You're mobile, and so are we.
Gets me going.
Grab the Light 87 app at the Apple App Store or Google Play now.
87.8 and 87.6 island-wide. Light 87.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have with us the head of IFC Sri Lanka and Maldives, Alejandro Alvarez de la Campa. And Alejandro, to ensure and enable them to actually perform optimally, how should and how could funding agencies as well as private and government sector institutions help SMEs grow?
Yes, obviously they will need the support of all stakeholders, including government, including private sector, and including development agencies like IFC, the World Bank, and a few others. Now, from the government point of view, my view is that the best support that the government can provide to SMEs is to really facilitate the creation of SMEs and to eliminate obstacles and barriers for them to operate. In other words, to make it easy for SMEs to operate, from registering the SMEs to providing them licenses and permits to operate, to allowing them to hire workers, to an easy system to pay taxes, etc. These are all very important issues, and oftentimes we encounter that there are very cumbersome and costly procedures and regulations that the government establishes for the operation of SMEs. So I think that's really where the role of the government should focus, is in facilitating the SMEs to operate effectively in the marketplace. In terms of the development institutions, and I'll focus on what IFC has done, and I think quite effectively in supporting SMEs, and which could be applicable to any other development institution. And we have worked with the private sector, so this would be both what can be done from the development institutions and the private sector. IFC has had a very strong focus on SMEs. SMEs is a priority for us, and as you know, we support private sector growth, and SMEs, as I mentioned before, are a key engine of growth in any country, including Sri Lanka. So here in Sri Lanka, we focus in 3 areas to support SMEs. The first one is through financing SMEs, which we usually do through intermediaries, because we believe that we can reach many more SMEs by using intermediaries to provide financing to them. And so we have provided funding and facilities to a few of the private commercial banks in Sri Lanka, Commercial Bank of Ceylon, NDB, Sampath, and they have provided financing to SMEs. That's the first way. The second area of support to SMEs has been through technical assistance and capacity building. And we have also done this work partnering with local institutions. So for example, we've just created the SME digital platform, which is, in a way, it's like a Facebook for SMEs. We have done this with the Commercial Bank of Ceylon and a technology provider called Global Linker. And what we have done is we have built a digital marketplace for SMEs so that they can trade and identify business opportunities with other SMEs, obtain financing through this digital platform, and in other ways promote their services or their products through the platform. And so far we have had more than 6,800 SMEs that have been registered, and more than 1,000 of those are in the export and import business. We have also implemented an SME skills building program where we train local trainers that can support SME customers in critical training around the business operations. So in business management, in areas like accounting, like marketing, so that they can be more effective in managing their businesses. We have also supported with women institutions like the Women's Chamber of Industry and Commerce, like Women in Management, to support women-owned SMEs, because we believe that the women labor force is still lagging behind that of male labor force, and by supporting women-owned SMEs, we can bring in more women into the labor force and contribute to economic growth. And finally, we've also partnered with institutions in the tech space like Slascom to support entrepreneurs in the tech space, including also women technopreneurs. Finally, the third area in which we have been supporting SMEs is by making a better enabling environment for SMEs. And this work we do directly with government. We provide technical assistance to government so that they can put in place regulations and systems that enable more SME growth. One example would be the work that we have done with the Central Bank of Sri Lanka by developing the first national financial inclusion strategy, which had at the core financial inclusion and SMEs. How can SMEs get more financing? And then another initiative that we've done with the government to improve the enabling environment is with the Export Development Board and the Ministry of Industries on trying to identify how we can support SMEs that have potential for becoming exporters, to support them to go that extra mile and start exporting.
I'd like to focus a little bit on the skill development that you mentioned. What are the major skill gaps that we are experiencing, especially in terms of the labor force of SMEs, and what more should we do to bridge these gaps?
Yeah, this is a very important area because oftentimes you see that perhaps lack of skills within the SMEs make them not being as successful as we wish they would be and become high growth companies. So the main skill gap that I see is on technology and innovation. I think when you look at today's world, where out of the 10 largest companies globally, 8 of them are tech companies, right? If you compare these to 20 years ago, they were companies mostly in industrial sectors and natural resources, perhaps, and today they are tech companies. So clearly what this tells us is that the future is in technology and innovation, and that every company has to make an effort in incorporating technology and innovation into their activities. COVID also proved to us that those companies that were able to adopt technologies quickly were able to cope better with the crisis and continue delivering services and goods to their customers, whether it was restaurants that went into food delivery, people in the health sector that started doing telemedicine with their customers, or any other innovation that was put into place, really proved very successful and demonstrated that companies can be much more resilient when using technology. I also think that from the policy side, there are some potential policy reforms that Sri Lanka could do that could help bridge that gap in terms of skills for SMEs. One is to reform the technical and vocational training sector by incorporating tech jobs and tech activities into that, because in addition to the traditional type of jobs and technical expertise that people gain in Tibet, in traditional areas of construction, electricity, and a few other areas, we could very well consider areas that are related to technology, like programming, software development, and a few others. Likewise, I think the education system in Sri Lanka would benefit from allowing more private sector investments in education, so that you can expand the range of potential education outlets that could go into more specialization in specific areas. And I think for that, you need to have the private sector to come and create that space for bridging some of the skill gaps that exist at the moment.
And then hopefully we'll be able to reverse the massive talent migration that's happening right now. Hopefully SMEs will be able to help with that. Any views on that, Alejandro, on actually reversing all the brain drain? Can SMEs get that?
Yeah, so look, that is an important factor here, because you know, a lot of people have left, and we, you know, not only from low skilled labor, but also a lot of the highly educated people have left. And I think there are a number of things that could be done on that. First of all, I think you have to look at the workforce in Sri Lanka, which is about 8.3 million individuals are active in the labor force today. About between 18-20% of those work in the public sector, and then the rest is private sector jobs. And a big part of that is SMEs, are about 45%. But when we look at the labor force, there are a number of areas that I think would be very important to focus on going forward, to make sure that even if people have left or there is brain drain, we can bring in more people to the labor force that are currently not there and that are highly educated. So one of them is women. When you look at the women labor force participation, it's only 35% in Sri Lanka compared to 70%. So it's half of men basically in the labor force. And a lot of these women are highly educated, and you know they could really bring a lot of economic benefits and an increase in productivity if they were to join the labor force. So that's one area where I think Sri Lanka could focus more. And IFC has actually been quite active in trying to incorporate more women into the labor force with a program that we've had, which is called Women in Work, where we had a whole component focused on employability of women. We've worked with a number of corporates in Sri Lanka and to incorporate more women into the labor force, as well as women into boards of directors in companies that are listed in the stock exchange. And it has been quite a successful program, and we've managed to bring in more women into the labor force. So that, in part, you know, could counterbalance the brain drain. I think also we have to think about digital entrepreneurship and create a more of a culture of digital entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial spirit within the young Sri Lankan population, because a lot of people still think that the safest way is to find a job as a public servant in the public sector. And so I think creating more awareness about the potential of entrepreneurship and the potential of job creation that comes along with that is very important. And then I think also the role of the diaspora has to be also brought into this, and see who from those Sri Lankans who have been successful outside would be willing to come back to give back to their country, because I think right now is the moment when those people are needed, and I'm sure that if an effort is done in identifying those and discussing whether they would be interested in coming back, that that could also bear some fruit in terms of bringing people back.
We've been talking with the head of IFC Sri Lanka and Maldives, Alejandro Alvarez de la Campa. It's been very nice having you on the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me, and it's been a pleasure.
And to all our viewers, thank you so much for being with us. Until next time, take care.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching, and stay safe.